Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, that he would be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on 3 days rise again. And he said all of this quite openly. Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you set your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And he called the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, "If any would become my disciples, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who would save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel, they will save it. What will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man also shall be ashamed, when he comes in his glory with his holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord. If you take today's gospel story and back up about 9 or 10 verses, there's this healing miracle. Jesus is encountered by a blind man who wants to see, and Jesus, it literally says, Jesus spits in his eyes, and he says, well, and the guy's kind of like, well, you know, I see these things that looks like trees walking around. Trees. And so Jesus sticks his hands on the man's eyes, and he takes them away and goes, now I see. Now I see. There are people there. There's people. They're not trees, they're people. And sometimes we can interpret that story by saying, well, you know, the miracle didn't really take the first time, or it took a couple of times, or why did that happen? But it seems to me, though, that there's wound up into that story in another sense. That there is seeing, and then there's singing. There's this sense that we might see, but like that man, we only see, instead of people, we see trees walking around. But then there is seeing, and knowing that the trees are trees, they're people. And that's important because in the story that immediately really follows that is the very famous story about Jesus asking his disciples about, who do you say that I am? And we go, you're this, you're that, you're this. And then Peter puts up, you're the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus goes, you got it. Come to the front of the line. Peter, you got it. You see. And then our story today picks up. And Jesus says, and since you see, let me tell you what it looks like to be Messiah. To be Messiah means to descend to the depths of the world. To suffer. Die. And Peter goes, Jesus, you can see this happening. Puts his arm around. Look. I don't know where they taught you Rabbi school, but up in these parts, Messiah doesn't mean that. That's not what Messiah. It means something else. You need to. This is what it really means. It's not about that dying stuff. That's not what Messiah is all about up here in this part of the world. And because he's the head, right? He's the one who's invited to the front of the line. You can get this sense because of what Jesus does now, immediately afterwards. Like the disciples must have gotten together and said, "Hey, you go tell them. You go tell them how this works. You go tell them how this works." And he looks at his disciples, and obviously, and you get the strong sense, they probably believe exactly the same thing that Peter's talking about. Because the word, it says he rebukes, not just Peter, but all of these people. And he's saying, you see, but you don't see yet. It's like you're looking at people and all you see is trees. You need to see. There's more for you to see than obviously what you grasp. You go to the back of the line, too. You go to the back of the line. Think about that for a little bit. Go to the back there. And he begins to tell these people, right? We've been, just like everybody else, Christian preaching for the last 2,000 years has basically said, Peter, what about him? Peter did it. But neither did anybody else. Because Jesus goes on with this story about, if you want to be my disciple, you got to take up your cross. And he doesn't say any more than that because everybody there knew, or they'd probably all seen enough Roman crucifixions. They knew what that meant. Take your cross. Follow me. Then you'll be my disciple. Take up your cross. Come down into the worst the world that has to offer. Come down into the midst of a broken world. And then you're going to see. But you see, Peter's not the only one in the stories of the Bible who's missed this. I mean, Adam and Eve, there they were in the garden, and they had God with them, and they didn't see the serpent for what it was. And there's Abraham. We heard about Abraham today. Right? And Abraham was like all of the rest of us. He believed that if you trust God, God will provide. Trust in God, do what God asks you, and God will provide. Right? That's right. So he hitches up his donkey and his sheep and his goats and his camels, and off he goes, and God will provide. And he's been waiting 99 years for God to provide. It's a lot of waiting. And it didn't work out exactly the way he thought it was going to go. It didn't for Peter, and it doesn't for any of us. Because we have this issue with seeing. We think we know what we want to see. It's hard to see what God would have us to see. There's no big secret, right, that the world is rejecting what the church has to offer. There's no big secret there. And we look around ourselves, we live in neighborhoods, we know about whether our neighbors are going to church on Sunday or not. I mean, we see this. We know what's going on. Maybe isn't it some of it like we're kind of like Peter? We think we know what the story is about, right? And we're quick to tell the world what we think the story is about. And the world's standing there saying to us, you keep telling us that Jesus is the answer, but you're not listening to what the question is. It's like, you don't see the questions the world asks us. So we keep missing with the answer, if you may. Keep missing the answer. If
If you want to engage the world, the story of Jesus, you have to engage the world. And the only place you're going to engage the world is down in its depths, down in its deepest places. That's what that's about, to pick up your cross. It's not about telling the world that we're right, but it's to go to the places where the world is. You go down into those places and listen, hear, and come to a point to understand the brokenness of humanity. And down in there, you begin to see where God will bring life forward. We're confident we have answers. Maybe we don't really see the questions very well. That down in here, down in the places where Jesus finds himself, down in the places where carrying a cross leads us towards, all of a sudden we begin to see with more clarity who Jesus is and what the story of the gospel is about, and really more about what our lives can be, because we see with greater clarity, and we see with Jesus' eyes. If you were to be the disciples of Jesus, it is about descending into the brokenness of humanity, hearing its story, and being able to relate to it, because so often we have covered over our stories and thought that they were something else because we couldn't even see ourselves. But down in the midst of the world, the promise of Jesus is that down in there you'll find your life. You'll find your life. You'll find the things that give life. You'll find the things that will raise you back up. You'll find nothing less than Jesus himself down in there. And it gives you life. Because it lets you see the world in ways that you never thought was possible. It strips away some of the things we thought we knew and puts in its place God's very presence. I would hope that as we move through the week that is ahead of us, that we're given the opportunity to remove the shadows that we thought we saw, that even in a brief glimpse, down in the midst of the world, that God gives us the ability to see. Those aren't trees out there, those are people out there. Those are stories, those are the lives of the people that God cares desperately for. He wants us to see that. And in seeing that, it points us towards our lives. It gives us the things that we need to live and to grieve, to become his people. May he give us eyes to see, hearts to believe, and hands to carry the crosses that we've been called to carry out into the midst of this world.